You feel pretty good. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can see the difference that other kids are, where are they in their lives compared to our children? And when we do that comparison thing, it sets us back, but we can't help it. I get it. Like, I totally understand that because it comes out of nowhere. Everything's fine. And all of a sudden, it's like that punch in the gut. And it reminds us that our child is on the autistic spectrum and that we have a different life and a different journey than what other people have. Hello, everyone. I am Bridget Shipman, and I'm the host of A Mother's Guide Through Autism podcast. And I'm really excited because today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be introducing to you a series that I would like to do on grief. Now, when I say grief, I don't want you to go, oh, gosh, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. I'm not really sure how it relates to my autism journey. Why are we talking about grief? What is this topic of grief? Because what I have noticed, and by the way, I would love to hear from all of you on, first of all, if you do feel like you have experienced grief when you have gotten the diagnosis of autism with your child or children, what that's like for you, and why is it when I or other people use the word grief, why that does not resonate, or does it resonate? So this is going to be a great series because I do believe that grief is part of our autism journey. I do believe that I have been in and out of grief since my son Joseph was diagnosed when he was 3 years old. And in the month of April, he's going to turn 31. And I do know for sure that I have experienced grief, but I just didn't know it. I didn't have the awareness of it. I didn't know how that related to what I was going through. I talk a lot about this being my first life tsunami that I have experienced or had experienced in my life. So yes, I have experienced other life tsunamis, but this was my first one. And I would say it is one of the more painful life tsunamis that I have gone through. So I am going to do a series on grief and how grief relates to each of us that were parents with children that are being diagnosed on the autism spectrum. April, that is coming up as I'm recording this, is Autism Awareness Month. And as we approach this Autism Awareness Month again, I do think it's important to put grief on our radar. I have a private Facebook group, and I have asked moms and members of this private Facebook group, what is it for them? Like, what is grief for you on your journey? And I hear a lot of the same responses over the last few years. I do think we do go through the stages of grief, which I'm going to go over in just a minute. But I also believe that we go through these stages over and over again. If that sounds depressing, it's because that really feels daunting. Like, what? You mean I don't get to the other side and then I'm going to go through this again and again and again? The answer is yes, but it's different. I think the difference for me is, although Joseph is grown now, I still go through different periods of grief and worry for him, just like all other parents do, because we are faced with different challenges that come up. And I listened closely to other moms, and one mom shared that she feels like everything's going okay. Like we found our new normal. We're doing great. And then all of a sudden, it's like a slap of reality. You could be, and I did this with Joseph too, in swimming lessons. And it took Joseph 4 years to pass his summer swimming lesson, where other kids got through it in one summer. And each year, that was something that I could feel deep sadness about. I'm like, oh my gosh. But when I reflect back, I realize, wow, Joseph kept going back. He was determined to do it. And now he's a great swimmer. And for me, what I learned from that is that we both built resilience, and that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many times it takes to get through something. We're going to get through it. The hard part is that we do experience grief on and off over and over again on our journey. Now, when I catch myself getting that deep sadness inside of me, I'm pretty sure anyone listening to this gets what I'm talking about. You feel pretty good, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can see the difference that other kids are, where are they in their lives compared to our children? And when we do that comparison thing, it sets us back, but we can't help it. I get it. Like, I totally understand that, because it comes out of nowhere. Everything's fine, and all of a sudden it's like that punch in the gut, and it reminds us that our child is on the autistic spectrum, and that we have a different life and a different journey than what other people have. So talking about grief really is essential. And what I would say to you is, the better you get at understanding grief, you're going to sharpen your tools. And when those moments come, and they will, you'll be able to move through that with more ease, with more self-compassion and love, than when we don't understand it and we don't relate to the fact that, oh my goodness, I just got that icky, deep sorrow feeling again because my child is autistic. And I believe that happens to all of us. So I decided that, yes, I've talked about this before. Yes, I offered a whole chapter in A Mother's Guide Through Autism book on stumbling through grief. I have written an article that was published in the Autism Parenting magazine most recently. It came out in February, and it was 8 steps to move through grief. I have it here before me. I have the book in front of me, because I'm going to be taking little bits and pieces of it and molding together an introduction for you to get you started. If you already have a pretty good understanding that grief is part of our autism journey, then these are going to be great reminders for you. And what the series is going to look like, it is going to offer you different perspectives from different people. So I have some great interviews lined up, and each week we're going to be bringing you an interview with other professionals on the topic of grief. And also we're going to relate it to their own experience on their own journeys on the autism spectrum. So we all have our own experiences of grief. We all have guilt. We all have all these same commonalities when it comes to our feelings. And they hit us at different times. I've talked about that. If you've read our book and you've read my chapter on stumbling through grief, you understand that grief comes in and out, and that I name my grief. And when I work with other moms, we name the grief and we get to really know our grief, because it's important to build that relationship with your grief. So I think this is going to be extremely beneficial for all of you. And what I'm going to ask is that you stay with it, come back, listen, give us feedback. What else do you want to know? What else would help you as you're going through your autism journey as a parent? And what do you need guidance with? But we're going to start with the basic. We're going to start with, yes, a lot of people don't like to use the word grief because we feel like, I've gotten this feedback, that grief is something that you don't apply to autism, because grief is when somebody passes away. And what I would say is, yes, we do grieve. I have lost people really close to me. And yes, those are life tsunamis. And grief may feel slightly different, but then it doesn't feel different at all. When you get that diagnosis of a lifelong disability for your child or children, we are grieving the child that we once thought we had, the future we thought our children were going to have. Although either way, we don't know for sure how it's going to turn out, whether they're neurotypical, right, or not, neurodiversity. We have an idea, we have thoughts of being a parent and what it's going to be like when we have our children. And then to get a diagnosis like that, it changes all the expectation and thoughts that you had for the future. And sometimes, not all the time, we get free advice from people who make the already challenging diagnosis even worse. And I'm going to use my life experience where I was told my son would never be independent. I was told that my son was never going to go to school. I was told that my son would more than likely be living with other people to get help in a community once I was no longer on this earth. That those are earth-shattering stabs in the heart. And not only do we fear the future, which is also part of the grief, we are truly, truly grieving the child that we once thought we were going to raise. And now all of that looks different. And it's about finding your new normal. And even when you do find your new normal, just as I was talking about, it will continue to come up, because this is a journey. And as I say it in our book, once a mother guide, always a mother guide. Once a parent of a child with a disability, always a parent of a child with a disability. So how do we navigate it? I am here to really offer you a true understanding of what is going on and how can you move through those really dark days where you don't know, you have no compass, you don't know how to read the compass, and all you know for sure is that you're on your knees. You are in a life tsunami, and how do you get up and how do you move through it? And I think sharing our stories is one really powerful way to do that. That's why I'm so transparent and I share with all of you. And yes, You are vulnerable when you share those things. You bet you are. But if you're willing to be open and vulnerable, that's where the true healing, that's where the gold is. That's how we heal. So I want to remind you that each week I'm going to, the goal is to get 8 different episodes on grief, give you different stories about other parents on grief, how they managed it, how they navigated it. And as we're going through the series, I would like to see you give us some input. How did this help you? And again, what else do you want to learn? So as a reminder, I mentioned the 5 stages of grief in A Mother's Guide Through Autism book. Now, I know that there are other stages that were added, but I'm sticking to 5. I want to make it as simple as possible. And my goal here is for you to be able to understand your own grief and to relate to my grief and everybody else that I'm going to be interviewing. But I want you to get really comfortable with your own grief. Remember, we're building a relationship with your grief. The 5 stages that I'll be working with are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And as I share in the book, you can be in all 5 of these stages of grief at one time. And I know that sounds really overwhelming, but it's true because I've done it. Given any one day, I can be all over these 5 stages. I have gotten to acceptance. I have gotten to the other side with my son. It's taken lots of work and many years. Now I have the tools, and that's why I'm sharing them with you. And I will be sharing the tools with you throughout the series. You can also pick up A Mother's Guide Through Autism book, and certainly this is written as a workbook. Go ahead and read it, work through it, reach out to me, get a free consult call. I do those all the time. You can work with me one-on-one. Keep listening to this podcast as we build this series, because I believe that you will be able to navigate and heal your heart and understand how to get to the other side, just as I have, of grief. Some of the things that other things that I want to share with you. As you're listening to this introduction of our grief series, I would like for you to spend some time with yourself before the next episode comes out and truly give yourself permission to grieve. We're going to do this in a structured way, but as you feel that deep sadness, give yourself permission to feel it. I didn't for many years, and that can cause a number of health issues for you. It can cause a lot of stress, anxiety, and it's going to trickle down to your family, to your kids, other relationships that you have now. And I know as a mom of an autistic child, that is lonely enough. I coach moms all the time where you just really don't feel like anybody understands you. And it is really hard to understand what it's like unless you're living it. So to give others grace, we are going to do that and realize that where the work is, yeah, we do need to bring autism awareness. Yes, we do. We need to teach people, because now 1 in 36 people are being diagnosed with autism. And so those numbers, I believe, will continue to grow for many reasons. So where do we begin when we get a diagnosis like that? Where do we begin when we're back into the grieving cycle because we've had a moment and realized that punch to your gut feeling has arrived. That's where the work is. That's where you begin. You begin with you. It's hard to do. I understand that it's hard to do, but I'm going to ask you to give yourself permission for these next few weeks to go through our podcast series, to listen to the stories, to journal about your own grief, to do the work in the workbook, A Mother's Guide Through Autism. Go to the national magazine, the Autism Parenting magazine. It's an online magazine. It's wonderful. Great articles in there. And I'm going to walk you through my 8 steps of how you can feel better once you've given yourself permission to grieve. And they're simple steps. I use a lot of these tools in the book, but for today, I'm going to just walk you through 8 steps. So grab your journal. If you're driving, just listen, come back and listen to this episode again. And I'm going to give you some information at the end of the podcast where you can reach out to me. Okay. First thing you're going to do is give yourself permission. If you're not ready, that is perfectly fine. Meet yourself where you're at and go sit with that until you are ready, and then come back and do this. Step 1, I want you to be able to give yourself the grace. So we've done the permission. Write this mantra down for yourself of kindness while you go through this grieving series and these steps. Be kind, be loving, be present. That is a mantra to use as you go through these weeks of giving permission to grieve and feeling the grief and healing. Healing's hard work. Mantras do help with that. Again, it's be kind, be loving, be present. And that is a mantra for you. I want you to imagine sitting with your best friend and comforting her or him. What would you do? Would you get her or him a cup of hot tea? Would you offer a cozy blanket, a box of tissues, a hug, the nurturing part of helping out your best friend while they're grieving? They've come to you, they need comfort. So that's where I want you to go. Step 2, I want you to take a moment. I want you to go get all the things that you would get your best friend to help them, and you go get them for yourself before we move on. So again, if you're driving, come back to this. Then once you've gotten your hot tea or whatever it is that would comfort you, your cozy blanket, I want you to find a safe space that you can continue doing these few steps with me today. Grab your favorite journal or just sit with it as I take you through the steps and then come back and do the work. Either way, meet yourself where you're at. Once you've gotten settled in, I want you to take a few deep breaths in a row, and I want you to invite grief to come in. Feeling scary, feeling like, I'm not into this today? Great. Come back later. For those of you that are ready to move on, I want you to invite your grief in, just like you would anybody else that you need to talk to. Once you've done that and you're sitting with grief, you invited your grief in, I want you to really connect to your grief. I want you, this is where the journal comes in handy, to really describe what your grief looks like. get in deep, deep detail of what your grief looks like. How big is your grief? What color is your grief? What is it that you're seeing when you're sitting with your grief? My grief is right behind me. So if you can't see me, it is the Wicked Witch from the Wizard of Oz. And I have a Wicked poster up in my office right behind me, which reminds me that grief is always present. But I have relationship with my grief. And so it's really important as you're coming up with this description that you get really, really clear on what grief looks like. Once you've done that, we're going to name your grief. What is your grief's name? Mine, for example, as I shared, is the Green Witch from the Wizard of Oz. And you can name her, you can, or him, I don't know, what everybody's different. So something else is going to come up for you. Okay. And just simply name it. Once you've named your grief, I want you to write a letter to your grief. I think that really, really will help you be able to get all those feelings out, and then we can sort through those. But it's important to build the relationship with grief before we can move on. Once you've written the letter and you've let your grief know everything that you want grief to know, then we're going to let grief know that it's time to leave. And you can invite grief in anytime you need to. Sometimes grief shows up when I have not invited her. And then I have the tools here and I'm like, oh, here you are. You swooped in on your broom without warning. And now here you are. But I can ask her to leave. I can say, now is not the time. Now is not the time. I need you to leave. So you can ask your grief to leave. Simply say, so you've got your grief's name, whatever it is. And grief, I need you to leave now. Okay. Thank you for listening to me. Grief, it's time for you to go. See you next time. I think that is an important step for you, because when grief swoops in, because grief will, you need to be able to have that tool ready and to have the relationship with your grief, and to know that you can invite grief in, but you can also ask grief to leave anytime you want. Once you've done that, I want you to, we're going to shift it right now, okay? Take a moment to comfort yourself, because, you know, the work that we're doing right now is pretty big and it can feel draining. But once you've done it and you've built the relationship, you'll be able to move on and move through grief when it surprises you, those surprise visits that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. So whatever it is that you would do for your best friend as far as comfort goes, I would like for you to reverse that to yourself. So now you're comforting yourself as you would anybody that you love and feel deep compassion for. I feel like if you can do this initial work, once we get to the other episodes of our grief series, you will already have built a beginning relationship with your grief, and you'll be able to apply a lot more to yourself as you move through our grief series. I hope that this helps. I want you to make sure that you come up with something that you're grateful for to shift. If you're feeling that dark, icky feeling, shift it and come up with a piece of gratitude, and now go do something nice for yourself. As I said earlier, I'm shuffling papers. I'm sorry if you heard that, but I want to make sure that I get this right. I want you to be able to go to a mother's guide through autism.com. That's where you can watch other podcast episodes, as well as anywhere that you can find podcasts, you can find us. If you feel like this episode was beneficial for you, if it helped you at all, would you please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and really help us get our podcast out there? Because this is all about spreading knowledge, hope, and inspiration. And the more we share our stories, the more we come together, the more other moms and parents we're going to be able to help. Autism awareness, and also to be aware that we do need help and we are building a community and that there is hope out there. And that's what this podcast is about. So if you would do that, please subscribe. The other thing is, if you would like to join our private Facebook group, please do. I post in there quite a bit. Other moms do too. And we have all kinds of professionals and parents, and this is just a support group for you to come join all of us when you're having one of those days. Also, I want to remind you that when you go to the website, you can email me, A Mother's Guide Through Autism, and let us know your thoughts. Let us know anything and everything that you're thinking about, what's helped you, what else you would like help with, and spread the word. And keep coming back, because the series is really, really going to be beneficial for you. And I'm hoping that you'll join us. So I hope this episode was beneficial. Let us know. Don't forget, like, subscribe, get a copy of our book, and join us on this series of grief. And let me hear from you. I'll see you in the next episode. I'll be interviewing a mom and a really great writer, and we'll be talking about grief and other things on her autism journey. See you next time. Stay well, stay safe.